Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents A Wind from the Rift by Bonnie Wynne. Narrated by Elizabeth Klett. Part 1. Prologue. The Clockwork City. The earth trembled. Enoch covered his head and screeched, but there was no one to hear him. The alleyway stood deserted, the cobbles slick as blood beneath his boots. Maybe it was blood. Don't think about that. He staggered forward, almost losing his footing as the ground shook again. Over the howling of the wind, he could hear distant, cresting shrieks. A jet of fire lit the night. Rain slapped at his face, stinging and savage, blinding him. Out. He had to get away from the city. Because if this didn't end soon, there wouldn't be a city to escape from. As if to confirm Enoch's fears, the island swayed beneath him like a ship listing in a storm. He was nowhere near the edge, but he thought he could hear the groan of the support chains. If even one broke, the island would cant sideways into the rift. He could picture it in his mind, the ground sliding away, the towers crumbling, mancers and healers and shopkeepers and servants rolling off the edge, like fruit off an upset table. The thought made him want to scream again, but Enoch choked it down. Panic wouldn't help. He stumbled on. There would be time for screaming later. If later ever came. Chapter 1. Shadows. The shadows held her. Gwyn pressed herself to the wall. Beyond the iron-strapped door, she could hear the voices of the guards, hear their footsteps up and down the room. When she stood on her toes, she could see through the barred window straight across to the door on the other side. Beyond that door was the stairwell that led to the open air, to freedom. Such a little distance. No more than 20 feet. The door to her cell had opened easily at the touch of her red magic, and she knew these two would as well. But the guards. How many voices? 3? 4? It didn't matter. The blood still gleamed at her wrist where the manacles had bitten into the skin. As long as that blood flowed, she could kill them. Gwyn edged closer to the door. Her footsteps made barely a whisper on the stone floor. She was lighter than she had been, light enough that the howling wind beyond the tower might carry her right off the bridge. Could a sorceress fly? She thought perhaps she could. That dark, coiling serpent in her breast said she could do anything, be anything, so long as there was blood. For an instant it seemed she remembered it. The wind tearing at her robes, the upturned faces of the crowd as she spread her arms and... No, that wasn't her. It was some other woman, some other sorceress long dead. Not her. Gwyn slumped against the wall, sickness twisting her gut. How long could she hold on to herself if these memories kept forcing their way in? She became a little less Gwyn every day. And the red magic. The red magic makes it worse. She knew that. The more she touched it, the more she used it, the worse it would be. Just memories now. But how long until she woke one morning and started calling herself Alvia Arden? No, she couldn't risk it. There was still the Vim. Still Sigel, the sign of fire. It would be a small thing to mark the inverted triangle on her skin. Then the guards would die screaming, with flames roaring from their open mouths. Would they even have time to scream? She hoped so. Men screamed so prettily when they burned. No! She wrenched herself away from the wall and stepped into the light. If the guards had been looking through the grate, they would have seen her. But they weren't looking, and she saw them instead, two seated at the battered table, one stirring the cook-pot by the far wall, none watching the doors. They thought her safely contained, her power locked behind silver shackles. Gwynne narrowed her eyes, homing in on the opposite door. 20 feet. With the red magic, she could jump 20 feet in the twitch of an eye. If she landed softly, the guards would never even know. True, she had only jumped 2 feet to escape her bindings back in the cell. But 20 was not so much greater than 2, and besides, she had jumped further back in Bitter Springs when the Padshah's army had... Blink. She reeled forward, catching herself against the wall as the contents of her stomach came up into her throat. She fought it, fought the sudden wave of vertigo and the hot, clammy sweat that sprang up on her skin. It took a moment to reorient herself, and when she did, she wanted to shriek with frustration. She hadn't made it through the door. She had barely jumped 1 foot. All that to cross a distance she might have stepped. The worst of it was that she did remember making bigger jumps. She remembered the sun hammering down on the back of her neck, and the sand shifting beneath her feet in time with the Padshah's war drums. The Crater Darvians had wanted a pitched battle, her 8,000 against their 20. A slaughter. Instead, she had jumped the 1,500 feet separating their front lines and slit their commander's throat. No, not jumped. Folded. That's what it was called. But Alvia Ardiden had done those things, not Gwynne. She knew that. Gwynne didn't remember why Alvia, had been in Crater Deep, or who the enemy commander was, or why they were fighting. She didn't remember what came before or after. But she did remember the fold and the heady scent of blood. She had been glutted on blood that day. Hundreds had died to feed her red magic. Gwynne looked down at her wrists. Bruises, old scars, and a smear of blood already beginning to dry. Not enough. Even if she spilled every drop in her own veins, it wouldn't be enough to fold the 20 feet separating her from the far door. She sagged against the wall. Her escape, over before it had begun. You should go back to the cell. If Castlemaine came, if he found her loose, well, she didn't know what would happen. Would Alvia's memories be there to save her next time he brought out the hot irons? Or would she have to lie there, strapped to that table, awake and screaming as her flesh crisped away? She could almost hear the heavy tramp of his footsteps in the stone corridor. Footsteps. She jerked upright. The guard who brought her food always came from the right of the corridor, from where she stood now, but Castlemaine came from the left. How? There was nothing that way but more cells, the ramp spiralling down into blackness. Not daring to believe, not even daring to hope, Gwynne retraced her steps. Back past her cold cell with its open door, past the stool where Enoch had sat and listened and doubted, past more cells, each barred and empty, deeper into the darkness. She wouldn't have seen the door if she hadn't been looking for it. It wasn't a door at all, just a faint indentation in the wall, a place where the mortar between the stones sat a little askew. But when she pressed her hand to it, she felt the thrum of magic in her bones. Locked. Not by steel or padlocks, thankfully. Without the red magic, those would have stumped her completely. No, this was a locking spell, a complex one. Gwynne smiled and closed her eyes. Sever. The mark burned in her mind, the first sign she had ever learned. A spell was a spell, and all magic could be severed, if the caster had the strength and the will for it. And Gwynne wanted to get out of this prison very, very much. The door made only a low snick as it came away from the wall. Still she held her breath for the space of 10 heartbeats, until she was certain the guards hadn't heard, that they weren't charging down the corridor with their swords bared in the lamplight. No sound except the faint drip of water and the chitter of insects somewhere in the dark. The guards might not even know the passageway was here. They were trained to ignore the comings and goings of the inquisitors. Certainly her screams had never drawn them from their posts. She shivered. It was cold in the passageway, and the air held the sharp tang of mould. She had to feel her way in the dark, her feet stumbling over each other. If she fell, would she have the strength to stand? Those long months in the cell had left her frail and weak, frighteningly weak. Soon she would have to stop and rest. And if this tunnel leads right to the Inquisitor's quarters, right to Castlemaine's bedchamber, perhaps, what then? She did stop then, if only because it was impossible to walk and tremble at the same time. Her teeth wanted to chatter right out of her skull. God's cursed fool! Is this how Ascapis raised you? To shiver and quail at shadows? Perhaps you should let Alvia Ardiden take over. Perhaps she wouldn't be such a damned coward. No. This was her fault, her doing. The gods, the scions, were free because of her. Because she had been foolish enough to trust Umbriel. Yes, she had defeated Beoret, had saved her own skin, and in doing so, she had handed the remaining scions the key to their prison. Gwyn couldn't change what she had done. Because of her foolishness, something terrible was coming. She had seen it in the scions' minds, right before they tore free from Beoret and escaped. I doubt very much they would be content to simply live out their modest human lives. Beoret's own words from their time together in the well. 5 scions, each at the head of an army wielding powers unknown. War. It was war that was coming. Yata, Siasa, Umbriel, Moloch Soon, Yotha, each one a general, a king, each with their own power, like the red magic, like the Vim. Would the scions be allies or turn on each other? If they chose to fight together, this world was already doomed. Gwyn tasted fresh air before she smelled it, and then she bounded forward, sucking in great heaving breaths, her weakness forgotten. Air, the first she had smelled in months, cold and clean and fresh, with the scent of rain. The door was just an ordinary door, wood-panelled and fastened with a simple locking spell. It gave easily at the touch of sever. In the long months without the Vim, the standing enchantments had grown weak and brittle. No wonder she had dismantled the lock so easily. It was raining outside, a hard, lashing rain that stung her skin, her open wounds. Gwyn barely noticed. She tilted her head towards the sky, and for several long minutes she just stood there, letting the water run down her face. And if she wept, well, only the stars saw. Chapter 2. The Archmage's Seal. Right out of her cell, they say. The door was barred with silver, and there were 25 guardsmen not 2 breaths outside. But did that stop her? Oh, no, not that one. The larderer leaned closer, eyes wide, her armful of pickle jars temporarily forgotten. But how, Nemi? There's not been an escape from the bird tower in... There's never been an escape from the bird tower. The cook gave her spoon a triumphant tap on the rim of the pot. Not in 2,000 years. The Mansers are in a right state, I don't mind saying. Manser Donnell sent his pie back untouched last night, and he's never been one to miss a meal. White as a fresh sheet he was. Never seen a Manser so rattled. She can't have got off the island, the larderer said, frowning. The air skiffs are under guard, unless she can turn invisible. You! Nemi barked, smacking her hands together. The larderer jumped, but the cook wasn't addressing her. "Do the mansers pay you to stand around gawking? Back to work, girl." The woman who called herself Yenna lowered her gaze and turned back to the oven. Her heart hammered in her chest. They're wrong about the 25 guardsmen, she thought. Even fully manned, the guard post couldn't hold that many. They were right about the air skiffs, though. Her tentative explorations these past 2 days had confirmed it. All 4 ports were monitored by a squadron of guards, with everyone on alert searching for the escaped sorceress. Not even a mouse would be able to sneak past. She'd been unconscious when the wizards first brought her here all those months ago, so she didn't remember the trip to the Clockwork City. She certainly didn't remember sailing through the air on a floating ship over a chasm 3/4 of a mile deep. But she must have done, because the wizard city sat astride a flat-topped island, suspended by 4 massive groaning chains at the ordinal points. Instead of ocean, there was nothing but open air, and a sheer-cut drop into screaming blue. The air-skiffs were the only way in or out. Gwyn, head and shoulders deep inside the oven, smiled grimly. They were looking for her. All the guards, all the wizards, the inquisitors, Castlemaine himself, probably, looking for the deadly escaped prisoner, who, at least according to rumour, had locked away their magic for all those months. They had turned the bird tower inside out, had searched the lower city, the sewers, the storehouses, the spaces inside the walls. But nobody was looking for a downcast scullion called Yenna. In her stolen sackcloth, her hair smeared with soot and hacked short with a carver's knife, she didn't look much like herself. She didn't look much like anything. As she scrubbed at the char-black stones, though, her smile faded. How long could it last? Until somebody counted the scullions and realised there was one too many. Until she accidentally met someone's eyes. She wasn't sure exactly what her eyes looked like now. She hadn't seen a looking-glass since she left Priory. But she had noticed the way the wizards in the bird tower stared, how they shied away. Even Enoch had hesitated to meet her gaze. And she hadn't forgotten Lucian's words in the library months ago. Sorceresses aren't human. Not really. They've glowing eyes. And, well, it's not you. She still felt human. Her back ached from scrubbing, and the tips of her fingers burned. But perhaps being human was a luxury she couldn't afford any more. She had to get onto one of those skiffs. The Clockwork City was a city in name only. For a start, the island itself was no more than 2 miles across at its widest point. And unlike a city, it had no stately homes, no bawdy houses, no play halls. There was a smithy, sitting alongside the enormous stables, but it was for the exclusive use of the wizards and their mounts. What the Clockwork City did have were towers. Graceful, sweeping towers of pink stone, grown all over with creeping ivy. Squat towers with red tile roofs and tiny secretive windows. Towers connected by bridges, by covered walkways. Towers overlooking other towers. The size of the island stopped the wizards building outward, so they had built up instead. The grain storehouse didn't count as a tower, because it was only 1 floor high. But it was round, with big curved doors and windows shuttered tight to keep the rain out. Most importantly, it had a thatch roof. Gwyn crouched behind the storehouse, shivering. Water trickled down the back of her neck and plastered her hair to her forehead. Somewhere in the distance thunder boomed and lightning sheeted across the sky. It was only a few hours past midday, but the sky was so low and dark it might have been nightfall. This is foolish, she thought, not for the first time. But what choice did she have? She had spent last night huddled in the larder, not sleeping, just kicking at her tatty blanket and running over the plan in her mind. To get past the guards at the airskiff docks, She would need a letter bearing Archmage Ravenmarsh's seal. A courier and secret business wouldn't be examined too closely. She could slip in among the others. Just another messenger to a far-off kingdom, carrying word of the escaped sorceress. But getting into the Archmage's study, well, that was the difficult part. Someone would notice a ragged servant barging in where only the head housekeeper and the Archmage himself were allowed to tread. She certainly couldn't fake the seal, with its complex loops and whirls, its moon-crowned tower and the encircling band of words, "Fail not the sheltering hand," in the old tongue. No choice, she told herself. It was foolish, and it was risky, and it was almost certain to fail. But she couldn't just stay here and wait to be found. She would escape or die. Gwyn crouched lower, eyes slitted against the rain. Guards patrolled this courtyard, but they only passed by the far edge every 6 minutes. She had timed it, then timed it again. Timing was going to be very important. If the guard returned too soon... She stiffened as his shadow passed by, wavering in the light of his oil lamp. Step by squelching step, his footsteps retreated, finally disappearing around the corner. Now. Gwyn pivoted, hoisting herself up onto the drain-pipe. It squealed under her weight, and she flinched, but the sound was muffled under another crack of thunder. Moving quickly, she pulled herself up the pipe, hand over hand. The effort made her tremble. As a child she had clambered all over the wagon when she could get away from Ascapus's watchful gaze. She'd been light and sure-footed as a spider. Vim. She hated how weak she'd become. Finally Gwyn stretched out her hand, grasping, reaching. When her fingers met thatch, she didn't wait. She focused on the inverted triangle, the sign of fire, hastily sketched onto the scrap of paper stuffed deep in her pocket. At the same time, she reached for the vim. Sparks fizzed at her fingertips, fighting the rain and the damp. A wisp of smoke. Warmth, but no flame. Vim! It was too wet, and the guard was coming back. She closed her eyes and sucked in a deep, calming breath. Still clinging to the pipe, she rubbed her fingers together, faster, building friction until she felt her fingertips catch alight. The thatch went up with a whoosh, and she shimmied back down the pipe, letting herself drop to the ground. In the lashing rain, the fire wanted to sputter and die. Of course it did. But this was her fire, and it would stay lit until she commanded otherwise. Gwyn knew she had to move before the guard returned, but she couldn't help lingering just for a moment, long enough to see the flames spreading, eating at the thatch. Half a minute, and the whole left side of the roof was ablaze. She did move then, and just in time. From somewhere behind her she heard a shout and the slap of feet on the cobbles. She ducked into the nearest alleyway and out of sight. Gwyn smiled. The wheels and cogs of her plan were ticking into alignment. She no longer feared the wizards coming for her. Tonight, she would come for them. In a city of towers needling towards the sky, the quartz tower stood at the centre, highest and proudest. The Archmage's study hunkered at the very top, a stone eyrie overlooking the expanse of scat-blasted roof tiles. Gwyn took the stairs 2 at a time, and her heart galloped in her chest before she had ascended 4 flights. After months of inactivity she was soft, her muscles weak and spongy. Elsie would be furious if he could see her. Elsie. Had he survived the festival? Had Lucian? And Phelan? If he had died, wouldn't the apprentice bond have told her? She felt nothing from it, not even a whisper. No. She refused to believe a pair of second-rate necromancers had killed Phelan. His pride wouldn't have allowed it. There were other rooms in the quartz tower. Studies, personal libraries, quarters for some of the senior wizards. She blew past them, Past the carved friezes, past the oil paintings of dead archmages with their hands folded primly in their laps. When she reached the archmage's antechamber, Gwynne was relieved to find it unoccupied. The burning storehouse had drawn everyone's attention. Even this far above ground, she could hear shouts drifting up on the night air. There was a fire-mad witch on the loose, and the wizards were rallying around their leaders like frightened geese. So far, so good. The study door wasn't locked, so Gwynne pushed her way inside. The polished floor tiles squeaked beneath her feet. She had been expecting something like Idris's study, perhaps, sparsely decorated, cluttered with books and papers, a brightly coloured housecoat slung over the back of the chair. But this room was more like Asclepius's wagon. A single oil lamp burned on a desk by the window, washing everything in a wobbling, diffuse glow. Clusters of herbs hung from the ceiling, brittlebrush, lavender, geed, others even she didn't recognise. A long work table lay strewn with brass objects, delicate glass alembics and tiny sets of scales no bigger than her palm. At the window, a telescope gazed towards the lights of the city, and a silver thurible let out a braid of sweet-scented smoke. The careless hodgepodge familiarity of it unsettled her. She had imagined the Archmage as another cold-eyed killer, like Castlemaine. A bully, perhaps, looking to cement his reputation with the capture of the mysterious heretic. Below-stairs chatter and her own observations said his position was tenuous, that he'd won the election by the skin of his teeth. And keeping her alive, rather than executing her on sight, had been an unpopular move among some of the wizards. But the man who owned this office didn't strike her as a monster, or even a politician. He seemed like someone she might actually like. Inquisitive, a collector of curios. Gwynne shook herself. This was no time to turn sentimental. Likeable or not, he'd been happy enough to leave her locked away in the dark all those months. Hurriedly, she moved to the writing desk and began opening drawers. Raven Marsh's seal, stuffed into the top drawer with the ink pots and other writing tools, was easy to find. She held the brass spoon to the oil lamp's flame and waited for the wax to soften, glancing every so often at the door. No tread of boots on the stairs, no whisper of robes. The patter of rain ghosted against the window panes. When that was done, Gwynne snatched a blank sheet of parchment, folded it, dribbled wax, and stamped the Archmage's seal. Though it cost her painful seconds, she fanned it in the air, waiting for the wax to fully set. If the seal was blurred or illegible. There was no warning. Gwynne felt their presence an instant before the attack struck home. The air shivered, and an invisible shield tried to slam down between her and the vim. She whirled, calling up her power. It flooded into her, hungry, as though it had been waiting. From the depths of the earth it roared up into her palms, so fast and so wild that her head spun. She knocked the attack out of the air. Another followed. She slapped it aside. Concussive booms snapped through the room, upending brass instruments, ink-pots, glass jars. Shredded paper rained down like ash. "Cut me off, would you?" she thought grimly. The vim flowed around her, through her, crackling along her veins, easy as breathing. She couldn't see who was attacking her, but it didn't matter. Fools! I am the vim. The air cleared, and Gwynne could make out 5 wizards in the doorway, flanking the Archmage. She recognised him from his portrait in the main hall, though it hadn't quite captured his weak chin. 5 wizards. Her stomach twisted. 3 she didn't recognise at all. But the 4th, standing to Raven Marsh's right. A sudden spike of terror made her falter, and it was all the wizards needed. The next lash of power caught her across the side of her head. A singing shock rippled through her. The world tilted, and she saw Castlemaine's cold, unsmiling eyes before everything vanished. Chapter 3. The Charnel Vaults. Gwyn woke drowning. She thrashed.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?